Good afternoon, gamers. My name is KarQ. There's an Overwatch Season 13 hotfix patch 2 weeks after the launch of the season. Not the mid-season patch, but this one does have quite a bit. Let's head on into it right away. The first changes are for the tank. Orisa's getting some hefty nerfs. The base armor is going to be reduced from 350 to 300, but the base health is going to be increased from 125 to 175. Fortify no longer reduces fusion driver's heat generation because you were able to press it before and spam like crazy. And finally, energy javelin's damage is going to be reduced from 80 to 70. There's no dev comments, but this sounds pretty hefty. I mean, Orisa was quite good, but I think it was largely in part due to Juno more than anything. And these nerfs kind of just put her in the shitter bed again, in my opinion. So expect a lot less Orisas to be played. Ramattra, pummel, reverted to pierce barriers once again and no longer deals that 2.5x critical damage. Now, this is interesting because 2 weeks ago when this change got introduced, a lot of people were, losing their minds, and rightfully so, because this was something that nobody really asked for. It wasn't necessarily a net buff or a net nerf. It was just a matchup adjustment. Maybe the Ryan matchup against Ram was a little bit more difficult because obviously Ram can't pressure and damage the Ryan, but he could break the shield a lot easier, which means the team could follow up. But again, the community generally did not like the change and said it just wasn't necessary at all. Why break the identity that was, kind of cool with Ram? So now they've reverted it. Wrecking Ball's quad cannons ammo is going to be increased from 80 to 100 and grappling claw duration increased from 6 to 8 seconds. I'm actually surprised to see Wrecking Ball buffs this patch. I actually think Wrecking Ball is a sleeper tank pick. He's actually not as bad as people think. Curious to see if this will overtake D.Va and Winston as the dominant dive choices. Don't think so, but it makes people who are really good at Wrecking Ball even better, so be careful out there. For the damage roll, we have Sombra as the only change here. Hack now exits stealth when hacking an enemy target. The translocator delay before entering stealth is reduced from 0.5 to 0.33 seconds. It feels a lot better if you look at the side by side. And the fade in time is actually reduced from 0.3 to 0.15 seconds as well. For EMP, the ultimate cost is reduced by 10%. Now, my thoughts on these Sombra changes, I don't think this makes her that much better. It'll feel a lot better for the Sombra player to go into your stealth a lot quicker and whatnot, but I don't think this magically makes her like a meta pick. She's still like a pick it only if they're running like a Ball or Doom where they come into you, because it's still really hard to pick and choose your spots in the enemy backline and camp squishies because it takes so long to wait for your stealth, go into stealth and get into a spot and jump out when necessary and when you need to. And I think that's where her strength lies, brawling and dueling, kind of close to the front line with your team and waiting for them to come into you. You can still obviously go into the back line if your pathing and everything is good and it's a little bit map dependent, but it's just so much harder now that I don't think Sombra is succeeding as much as the rework. And I don't foresee these changes altering that too much. And she's definitely just a very, very situational pick still. And finally for Juno, the orbital ray healing is reduced from 100 to 85 health per second. I think this is actually a fine nerf. I think orbital ray is one of the best support ults in the game. I think it's a little better than Kitsune Rush, to be honest with you. It's 100 healing per second with a huge AoE damage boost. If you put it in the right spot, man, that Juno ult just turns fights completely. I think this is a step in the right direction. And that's it for the changes for the base game. There's one more change for open queue. Starting in season 13 for open queue competitive, we now match players in wide groups and narrow groups and solo groups in the same matchmaking pool. This change is aimed at helping groups of any size in open queue from having to wait extremely long times to find a match. We'll be removing the wide group modifier and notification UI in the open queue competitive in a future update. I mean, this is good for like the 2% of players that actually play this mode. Now, for an interesting patch here, I wasn't going to cover this initially, but Aaron Keller tweeted out on Monday, October 28th, that 15% of players are still playing the JUNKENSTEIN'S Lab arcade mode. 2 weeks after the mode comes out is actually insane, to be honest with you, because Blizzard has decided to keep this mode available to November 4th, only one more week, and they're actually going to balance it. A couple of nerfs and buffs here, so let's go through them all right now. For the no escape mutation, the chunky pellets weapon damage increase is reduced from 100% to 75%. And for the anti-boost, they actually fixed an issue where Booster was dealing extra damage in addition to the anti-effect, so that's why the D.Va was outrageous. For Waning Whirlwind, the overheat meter depletion is increased from 50% to 90% when using Javelin Spin. Similarly, for Chilling Blow, the overheat meter depletion is also increased from 50% to 90% when using Energy Javelin. For Arcane Energy, the Energy Javelin cooldown reduction is increased from 15% to 20%. For Mega Monster, the slowing effect is reduced from 35% to 20%, so she moves a lot faster. For Violence Begotten, the critical hit attack speed is increased from 6% to 8%. And for Flight by Night, that free flight movement speed is increased from 10% to 15%. For Ashe, the Trial by Fire ultimate charge from damage to burning targets is increased from 25% to 30%. For Fire and Fury, the cooldown reduction on Coach Gun and Dynamite is increased from 5% to 7% when shooting a burning target. For Demon's Ward, that bubble from Bob health is increased from 300 to 600. For Genji, the Scary Speed mutation, the attack speed increase is increased from 2% up to 15 stacks and changed to 3% up to 10 stacks, so total still 30%, but it ramps up a lot quicker. For Vampiric Deflect, the Deflect heals is increased from 10% to 15% of your max health per second. For Bitter Revenge, the next Swift Strike damage is increased from 50% to 75%. And finally, for the Master Ward mutation, the cooldown increase is reduced from 5 to 3 seconds. For Pharah, one change here, a nerf, the Scarial Superiority damage increase duration is reduced from 5 to 3 seconds. For Reaper's Swift Shadow, the Shadow Step cast time duration is reduced from 35% to 30%. That's actually a small nerf. For Kiriko, the Not Your Time mutation, extra healing increased from 25% to 30% when allies are below 50% health. For Drawn Together, the overhealth granted after teleporting is increased from 50 to 75. For Unburdened, the attack speed duration after using Suzu is increased from 1.5 to 10 seconds. For Vindictive Vision, the positional reveal duration is increased from 3 to 5 seconds. And for Self-Realization, the Protection Suzu bonus self-heal is increased from 80 to 100, and the move speed duration increased from 2 to 5 seconds. For Mercy's Fall from Grace, the movement speed increased from 15% to 20% during Angelic Descent. For Mend and Mar, healing allies within 20 meters is increased from 100% to 150% of your damage dealt. The Valkyrie amount is unchanged. For Power for a Price, the damage boost healing from damage dealt is increased from 8% to 10%. For Witch's Pact, the living target resurrection window is reduced from 10 to 7 seconds, an interesting nerf here. And for Witches Never Die, the Winston Bubble health barrier is increased from 300 to 600. Moving on to Moira, Frightening Fascination, the secondary fire narrow angle lock is reduced from 50% to 40%. I honestly have no fucking clue what that means. For Siphon Strike, the melee energy restoration is increased from 10% to 15%, and for Equilibrium, the movement speed penalty is reduced from 30% to 20%. And for Zen, the final hero that's getting a change, Hollowed Speed's getting a nerf where the Harmony Orb movement speed buff is reduced from 25% to 20%, and Master and Disciple Self-Harmony Orb effectiveness is reduced from 50% to 40%. And that's it for the JUNKENSTEIN'S lab. It's 1 week left. Enjoy the challenges, enjoy the patch. Have a good time. Goodbye.